All right, guys. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever it is that you're watching this. Module two. Module two is not nearly. It's not as long. It is kind of in depth. It's kind of that's the science. I ask you to trust the science. I mean, again, sometimes people hear science, oh, and then they shut their mind off. This is the why I'm presenting information like this. I think it's important to know so you understand that the program that's being presented is one that fits the way that your body works. We're going to go over chapters 3 and chapter 4. Really, it's discussing the communication between fat, muscle, and the gut, which is really, let me get my pen out here, what this crazy diagram is supposed to be here is we have this communication between our gut, liver, different areas of the body. We'll get into that. So let's start with this. What is fat? What is it? Most people never stop to even consider what is this thing that I despise so much? Oh, it's just something that jiggles when I walk. No, it's much more than that. Much more than that. And we need to understand this. Why? I like this quote. Jeffrey Friedman, a scientist who published an article in the Journal of Science, a very reputable journal in 2003, he called it a war on obesity, not the obese. And he said, quote, a different kind of understanding is called for. He's meaning when we are trying to lose weight and help someone lose weight. A different kind of understanding is called for. Obesity is not a personal failing. Now I'm gonna have to pause there really quick. I am a very like conservative type mindset of yes, it's on you. You work hard. These things are gonna happen. And so I do know that for some people, I don't know, maybe you were skinny your whole entire life and you're like, forget it. And you just started eating Captain Crunch for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with Mountain Dew, and you gained weight. That obviously we know is a personal failing. Okay. So I'm not removing that. But for a lot of people, it's not a personal failing. In trying to lose weight, the obese are fighting a difficult battle. Notice the word that he used. Um, it is a battle against biology, a battle that only the intrepid take on, and one in which only a few prevail. For those of you, maybe those of you taking this class, you trying to lose weight might be like a battle or war. And sometimes we can view weight loss as war. Um, Sun Tzu, he said this famous quote, know yourself, know your enemy, and you shall win 100 battles without loss. The issue with thinking that body fat is just, oh, it's just this jiggly tissue, of thinking about it in that aspect is that you don't understand what you're trying to do. If you don't understand what this body tissue is, at least on a superficial level, you have no clue on what it's going to take to lose weight, because it is kind of like a battle. Let's talk about this battle concept really quick, and then we'll define really what our body fat is. In a conventional war, the commander who's in charge of everything, he will have to synchronize. There's that key word that we saw in module one. He'll synchronize an attack through the air with our Air Force, if we're talking about America, the ground through the Army, and then the sea with the Marines. You would be very inefficient as a military leader if you said, we don't really care about the Air Force, or we don't really care about the Navy, or we don't really care about the Army. Um, we'll just try to win with one of them. You would not be very effective. You need all three of them to be effective. In weight loss, in this battle that we're speaking of, attacking in the air, the ground, and the sea could be replaced by attacking areas such as the body fat, the muscle, the gut. We discuss all of these things. If we are only dieting, then we're not attacking the area of the muscle because we're not exercising. If we're not thinking about the health of our stomach, which we'll discuss a little bit here and then more throughout the course, then we're mitigating one of these areas. Traditional weight loss programs, one of the reasons they fail is they only focus on one of the battlefronts, maybe two. Rarely do they have all three. And so the idea here is that we're going to be focusing on all of the battlefronts. Let's go back to fat. What is fat? In 1905 is when we first realized that it was much more than just this tissue that bounces as we walk. Von Gerk found out that we stored some carbohydrates there. Well, since then, we started to learn a lot more. And our body fat is this active endocrine organ. An endocrine organ is an organ that releases hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers that are released into the bloodstream, and then they go and they communicate with different organs of the body. Think about this body fat. Here's an example, some fat tissue. Now, here's all these different hormones. This is where you can get kind of like, well, it's too much. Don't worry about that. But just know all these different hormones are released from this fat tissue. Hormones are released from fat tissue. These hormones communicate with other tissues in the body, and they exert a lot of functions. Look at some of the functions that these hormones do. Metabolism. And think about, does this impact weight loss? Well, no brainer. Growth and development, sexual function and reproduction, heart rate and blood pressure, appetite, that obviously affects weight loss, sleeping and waking cycle, that affects weight loss, body temperature, a calories unit of heat. So yes, body temperature also affects weight loss. Our fat releases these hormones. Now, let's add a little bit more to this complex tissue of body fat. Our body fat is the only organ in the body with unlimited growth potential, right? Think about it. Our brain has a potential. It can't grow. It'd be nice if we could get smarter, right? Our liver, our heart, those other organs, they may grow a little bit, but they're not going to have unlimited growth potential. Our fat does. Unlimited growth potential. Well, our body fat releases hormones that will dictate this growth. The hormones that it's releasing are going to dictate, is it going to grow or is it going to shrink? Now, these hormones are called adipokines. I'm not going to use that term from here on out. We're just going to talk about fat-derived hormones, or I might just say fat hormones. But these hormones, that's the primary communication tools. Our fat, and what I'm trying to signal here with this image, will release hormones that will impact the brain. For example, leptin is a hormone released from fat that when leptin is released, you're supposed to not be hungry. Imagine if leptin is not released the way that it should be, you're always hungry. And so now fat's communicating to your brain, making you want to eat. Well, we know that fat can communicate to the muscle and muscle to the fat. We know that it communicates to the liver. The fat will communicate to all of these different body tissues. This shouldn't be surprising when we look at obesity. In one of the classes that I teach, I often would always have the debate of, is obesity a disease? What do you think? If I ask you that, do you think obesity is a disease? How would you answer that? I have a lot of students that say, yes, it is. And I have a lot of students that say, no, it's not a disease. Well, in 2013, the American Medical Association, they declared, okay, obesity is a disease. And they did that for a lot of reasons. But after they made that declaration, a lot of other medical organizations then followed suit and said obesity is a disease, such that it's almost universally accepted that now we call obesity a disease. Why do I bring that up? Most human diseases are not independent of each other. Most human diseases are not independent of each other because a defect in one organ then affects the health of other organs. The body organs have an incredible ability to communicate with each other through hormones, such that if one organ is disrupted, our fat, our muscle, the communication network then leads to other diseases. For us, we're talking about obesity. The health of our fat tissue affects the health of our muscle. The health of the muscle affects the health of the fat. We call this crosstalk, where these organs communicate with each other. I'm making this point because you cannot lose weight if you just diet and do not exercise, because then the health of your muscles are deteriorating. That will then send signals to your fat tissue that will lead to fat accumulation. They communicate with each other. The health of both must be there. Let's look at the muscles. Again, the muscle is very similar. It's an organ in the sense of when our muscles are contracted, it releases all of these different hormones that have numerous impacts on the body. We've known this for a while. let me give you an example of how strong these hormones are. There is a lot of research on exercising one limb. I did a study somewhat like this once, where meaning a group of people come in and they just do a leg extension. Meaning they come into the gym and they get down and they get their leg on a machine, they just go out and in, out and in. And these researchers only had them do it on their dominant leg. So they just did leg extension. They trained for 12 weeks. They only did it on their dominant leg. The other leg did no exercise. And then before and after the 12 weeks, they measured strength. And they found that even the leg that didn't do any exercise, it still got stronger. Now, it wasn't as strong as the leg that did exercise, but it increased strength. Why? These researchers found out that because the leg that was exercising, it released all of these hormones and these chemical messengers to where it affected the other leg to where it still increased strength. These hormones are very important and they can favorably affect fat loss, or they can negatively affect weight gain if we're not exercising them. Now, this is how this works. Most of the hormones released from fat are pro-inflammatory. We don't want that. That can promote obesity. Most hormones from fat are pro-inflammatory. On the other hand, most hormones released from skeletal muscle are opposite of that. They negate those fat hormones. So meaning if you're releasing fat hormones that are pro-inflammatory and not exercising, you're screwed. But if those hormones are being released and you're exercising, the hormones released from the fat, or excuse me, the hormones released from the skeletal muscle will stop the hormones released from the fat where you don't have these negative effects. Let me give you an example. I'll use the name Jill. That's not the real name of this client. I had a client who came to me when I was running this weight loss clinic. And one thing that we would do is I would measure resting metabolism. And at rest, usually you should be burning mostly fat at rest. That's normal, as long as you've not eaten anything. Well, I measured Jill, and at rest, she was burning about 90% carbs, which is not how you should be. This is important. Has anybody ever said, I want to lose 20 pounds of carb? Nobody has said that. We want to lose 20 pounds of fat. And so if you're not burning fat, you're not going to lose fat. Well, Jill wasn't burning fat at all. And I started asking Jill questions, and I didn't realize that she's not exercising either. And so I said, this is what we need to do, Jill. We need to get you exercising and increase the health of your skeletal muscle. When we do that, more than likely, your fat will be enhanced, the health of your fat, to where you burn more fat. Well, we had her exercise for about 6 weeks. We came back and retested her, and just that took place. That now that she exercised her muscle, she had an increased ability to use fat for energy, and she was also losing weight. And so both must be used hand in hand. Now, the last area, so remember we're talking about attacking the body and these different organs. We talked about that our fat is an organ, our muscle is an organ. And now we have what we call our gut microbiome. Essentially, we mean all of the bacteria living in your gastrointestinal system. I'm just going to use the word gut. It's home to millions of microbial bacteria that influences weight loss. This is a very new area. 90% of our gut bacteria can be divided into two families. We call them the Firmicutes or the Bacteroides. Okay, we have two families of gut bacteria. What we know is that obese mice and humans, that they have more Firmicutes than they do than their lean counterparts. And so Firmicutes tend to be the ones that we want. We also have showed that if we transplant gut bacteria from obese mice into lean mice, the lean mice then gain weight without even eating anymore, just transplanting gut bacteria. So now we have this third dimension of this crosstalk. So crosstalk is communication between organs, where the health of the gut is now affecting what's going on at the fat tissue. All three of these areas need to be addressed. The skeletal muscle needs to be addressed through exercise. Our fat tissue obviously needs to be addressed. And then our gut health needs to be addressed. And we can address the fat in the gut through both those, through exercise and diet. And so these three organs will communicate together. It's this synergy concept. If we have them all healthy, we're more likely to lose weight. Take home message. Hormones are chemical messengers released into the blood. Okay. Fat, muscle, and the gut are all organs that release hormones that create a communication system between these organs. They're all communicating with each other. The health of one of these organs impacts the health of the other. Thus, we want to favorably affect them. I have to bring that up, even though you might have thought, man, I felt like I just went back to school, because that leads into the next chapter, chapter 4, clocks. With that understanding that they secrete, all of those secrete chemical messengers, hormones, to communicate. So now we go into chapter 4, and we talk about this concept of a circadian rhythm. Circadian is derived from the Latin term meaning circa or around, and diem meaning day. So we're talking about a 24-hour period throughout the day that affects our bodily processes. Okay, we have grown to predict these light and dark cycles such that our body has adapted to do certain things at the right time. And the right time, depending on what we're talking about, might be during the day or it might be at the night. These are dictated, meaning when is fat releasing fat, or when is our blood pressure going to be highest, or those kind of things, which are all based off time of day. They're dictated by different genes and different hormones. Okay. All organisms, ranging from little single cell bacteria to us humans, exhibit what we call circadian rhythm. We have clocks that dictate this. Just like a clock on your wall will tell you what time it is, and then you'll know what you should do. We have internal clocks in the body that, if we're following those clocks, it's saying you should eat at this time, you should exercise at this time. Let's talk about some of these clocks. We know that we as humans contain a single, what we call a central clock it's called the suprachiasmatic nuclei in the hypothalamus, or in the hypothalamus. So we have a single clock that's in the hypothalamus. I want you to think about these clocks when I talk to them like a choir. I have a sister that went to BYU on a music scholarship, and I used to poke fun of her all the time because I'd ask about her classes, and she'd have a conducting class, and I'd be like, conducting class? That's not hard. But she would explain to me how important it is, and I'm not musical, so some of these things I'm saying are extremely ignorant. If you get a choir together, you have your different sections, right? Bass, soprano, alto, and I feel like I'm missing one. I probably am. And you have your choir conductor who has to get all those different sections to synchronize together to work effectively. In the example of the body, this clock in the brain, that's your choir conductor. And you have different clocks in other areas of the body. You have them in your fat tissue, in your liver, in your gut, and in your muscle. We have different clocks in these areas. These are what we call peripheral clocks. Think about what would happen in the choir example. If the choir conductor, okay, the choir conductor stands up in front of his choir and is trying to tell the bass section to start, but yet the alto section starts and the bass section doesn't. The alto section might be beautiful, but if the alto is not doing what it's supposed to be doing when the conductor is telling them to, then as a whole, the choir is not going to sound good. It's not going to sound good at all. This is what's going on. The thing that dictates this clock is light and dark cycles and when we eat, meaning this clock starts its process when it sees the light and when we eat. That's when it starts its process. So imagine that this clock, it's at nighttime and it's eating. That's conflicting. It's at night, so it's dark. The clock is saying I shouldn't be eating, but yet I'm eating while it's dark. Those are conflicting signals. Now, remember, this is sending signals to fat tissue. So now it's saying, well, what do I tell the fat tissue to do? Is it supposed to store? Well, I better just tell it to store, which is what we don't want, right? What should the stomach do? Should I tell it to be hungry? I'm just going to tell it to be hungry. So now we start to mess this up. It's called desynchronization, where we mess. They're not synchronizing together. That leads to weight gain. This leads to weight gain. This is why eating at the right time of day, which we're getting at in a different module, is so important. The clocks of our body, just like any other timepiece, these clocks can be set, meaning there's certain activities that will determine when these clocks start. Eating, we already said, time of day, light and dark cycles. Exercise, for example, has been shown to set these clocks as well. But if we don't perform these activities in the right time, then we have desynchronization, and then it leads to weight gain. The biggest example of this is shift work. Shift work individuals, they have to be awake all night. So they're eating in a time when their central clock says that they should be sleeping. And then they're sleeping in a time when their central clock says they should be awake eating. They're desynchronized. We know that shift work individuals have more obesity. We also know that they're not as healthy as far as like having risk for heart disease and those kind of things. And so this is what we want to avoid. Now, the idea of bringing this up isn't that I think that it's important for you to memorize all these things about where these clocks are, but to note that they're there. That because they're there, our body was developed to eat and exercise and sleep at certain times. We'll bring this up. There's no such thing as someone that's a night owl in relation to weight loss. Don't get me wrong. Some people can stay awake longer than others. My wife can stay awake all night and I'm out by 8 o'clock. But if we're talking about weight loss and obesity, there's no such thing. So what's the take-home message? What am I trying to get through with this? Processes that impact weight loss take place on a 24-hour circadian rhythm. Clocks are located within the body that are set based on light-dark cycles. When I see the sun, the clock starts and I should be eating. When I don't see the sun, the clock is then saying I should not be eating, I should be sleeping. These clocks need to be synchronized to effectively aid in weight loss. Eating and exercising at the correct time of day are two key features to synchronize these clocks together. This chapter, again, is foundational. This is giving kind of the background of why the information is being presented that is being presented here. So go ahead, when you feel like you're comfortable, you should answer those questions to kind of review at the end of this module.